What's going on, y'all? So they keep pushing this both sides nonsense. And that really only works if you don't look at the data. The data tells a completely different story from the headlines. And once you see how it's actually built, once you see that, once you see what gets counted, once you see what gets ignored and what gets moved around and everything like that, the whole both sides nonsense just falls apart. And it falls apart quick. And that is exactly what they are counting on you not doing. They are counting on you not to look at the data. And so that is what we are going to do today.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Mission Ready Men briefing, where faith in God is the standard and masculinity is not toxic. Today is Thursday, April 30th. April's over in the year of our Lord, 2026, and we have a ton of stuff to get into. Part of it may be just because I'm long-winded and there's so much to unpack in all of this. But before we do that, real quick, please hit like and subscribe. Help us get past this algorithm's chokehold. It seems like we are getting past it, but please help us out because it has slowed down a little bit, and every click, every like, every comment helps us out immensely. So we would really, really appreciate that. And just so you know, just so that as a reminder, we run this show on the SHR Media Network on YouTube. And we also have my personal channel, and it's the same show. Same broadcast, but we are growing over there as well. So if you're not subscribed over there on the personal side, please do me a favor and subscribe over there as well. We're at 946. Last time I looked, we want to get to 1,000. So if you could do me a favor and help me get there, that would be outstanding. I would really appreciate that. And also, by way of announcement, a quick programming note, we are rolling out a new Saturday show, the Mission Ready Men Weekend Debrief, live on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Central Time. It's the same mission, just a little less structure for the weekend, fewer guardrails, and we'll be reacting to clips and breaking down some stories and stuff like that. Getting into things that we normally don't get into during the week, pop culture stuff, things like that. A little more lighthearted as the show permits, as the material permits, and we are really looking forward to it. So please do me a favor and check that out on Saturday at 8 p.m. Central Time. All right. Now that is out of the way, we hear every time some kind of tragedy happens, some kind of attack happens, whatever the case may be, we hear the same line. We hear the left say that we have a both sides issue, and they'll come up with this thing that says the data shows that right-wing violence is the real threat. Don Lemon famously said the real threat is from white men, which is utterly ridiculous. And I wonder how his husband, quote unquote husband, felt about that, but that's a whole other issue. The data that they cite, they like to cite data to claim the authoritative high ground, so to speak. It sounds settled, it sounds scientific, and most people look at that and accept it and say, well, I don't know about most people these days, but it has been the norm that most people just accept that. It's not the case. When someone says the data is clear, or like when they said the science was settled, what that normally means to them is don't dig any deeper. Don't look any further into it. We don't want you to see what's really going on. And one of the things that they, well, one of the studies that they cite, and there's usually 2 or 3 that they cite in claiming that the data shows that conservatives are the ones it's right-wingers who are the ones committing all of these acts of violence, political violence. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And we've talked about this before. How they leave out certain key events. They don't even count certain crimes that, even though they're well documented. And one of the studies that they like to cite is this Cato study, and The Economist and some other publications have cited that study, trying to support the idea that all violence is right-wing violence, that all political violence, is right-wing violence. And one of the things that when I read this, I was dumbfounded, really. One of the things that they do is they have taken, this is the Cato study, I believe, they've taken crimes committed by the Aryan Brotherhood, dealing drugs, meth labs, stuff like that. They will take that and classify those crimes and the violence that they commit as right-wing violence. Meanwhile, they will completely ignore the George Floyd riots. They will completely ignore all of that stuff, the mostly peaceful protests, if you recall, despite the fact that dozens of people lost their lives in that violence. It's really unbelievable that they do this. And one of the other things that they, I've talked about this before, they don't include, or they didn't include in this study, the murder of Aaron Danielson. And I showed the part of that video last time we were together. And the perpetrator, the killer, said, "We got a Trump supporter here," and then shot him. And so they claim that they claim that right-wing violence dominates politically motivated attacks. And then they use that to drive policy. They use that to prioritize law enforcement responses and things like that. And of course, the cultural narrative is driven entirely by that. Now, this isn't about whether or not right-wing violence exists. We know that some people are crazy on both sides of the aisle and will engage in this behavior. We know this. No one is denying that it exists. But on balance, when you look at everything that's gone on in the past 30 years, when you look at it from a clear-eyed, impartial perspective, we know that it's coming primarily from the left. There's really no getting around it, despite their best efforts. The right-wing violence category is overbroad, very flexible in terms of what gets included and what doesn't, as I talked about the Aryan Brotherhood and their crimes. But the left-wing violence, if it gets included at all in any of these studies, is very narrowly described, very restrictive in what gets included, and almost always excludes protest violence and pretty much everything that is very obviously left-wing violence. Let's take a look at this, because I really want to drive this home. As I said, we have the Cato Institute as one of the main drivers behind this narrative that it's right-wing violence that is the problem. And there's also the Prosecution Project, which has some epically flawed data. And I want to see if I can pull that up. Because, as I said, and it's the Prosecution Project that includes the Aryan Brotherhood in the meth gang that they have in their data. They don't include the vandalism of the Tesla dealerships that took place. They don't include any of this stuff. And then they wonder why people don't believe the data that they're trying to present. The Conservative Action Project, they have petitioned the Prosecution Project to pull back their report, because the data is just so wildly flawed. They don't include 9/11. They don't include any of the victims from 9/11. But they included the Oklahoma City bombing. What else? They didn't include the Waukesha Christmas massacre when the driver drove through the crowd. They didn't include that. And there's so many others that they're manipulating us, or they're trying to manipulate us in the hopes that we won't dig deeper. And I'm here to tell you that we need to dig deeper. We need to dig deeper, and we need to shine a light on this madness and let everyone know that it's not a both sides issue. I want to, I came across this morning. It wasn't originally part of my show prep, but I listened to this morning, and I really want you to hear this, because this was, oh yeah, I got so much to get into here, because it's really astonishing to me. It is honestly astonishing to me that people don't see what's happening when you have these left-wing celebrities like Hassan Piker, who is campaigning. He's best friends with Mamdani. Go figure, two Muslims. But he's campaigning with other Democrat candidates, and he has openly, repeatedly on his channel talked about killing conservatives, advocating, not just talking about it, advocating for it. If I get a chance, we'll play some of that as well. But I wanted to play this because when I watched this and listened to this morning, I knew I had to include part of it, because this was very impactful. So just take a listen and watch this. This is Erica Kirk's response after or part of her response after what she dealt with at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
In this culture we're living in, absorbs disagreement as a form of personal betrayal. It turns having an opposing viewpoint into a moral crime worthy of punishment. And here's what I've realized through all of this, truly, having lived through quite literal hell these past 7 months, if you strip someone of their humanity long enough, you will arrive at the chilling conclusion that they don't deserve to exist at all.
There it is. And that is the conclusion that these leftists have come to. You saw it in the manifesto that this latest attempted assassin wrote when he tried to assassinate President Trump. When you call someone Hitler, and think about it, there's the famous thought experiment. If you knew what Hitler would grow up to be, would you kill him as a baby or as a child? Everyone thinks that Hitler is evil, should never have existed. So if you're comparing people who you disagree with to Hitler and all kinds of other terrible people, the logical conclusion is that you think they should die. They don't deserve to live. And that's where we're at. And these people, these left-wing politicians, the media needs the narrative. The American Pravda needs the narrative. Politicians need a defined threat to go after. And once you define those categories, those parameters, and you have the means to control all of that, like these politicians and the left-wing American Pravda does, you can control the outcome. The studies that they cite in support of this notion that conservatives are the violent ones, it's not a true measure of reality. It's an attempt to shape reality. It's about the incentives behind these numbers that they're putting out. And they're putting out these numbers to drive exactly what's happening. They're putting out these numbers to drive the idea that somebody like Charlie Kirk deserved to die, that President Trump is a dictator and deserves to die, that anyone who supports him, that anyone who supported Charlie Kirk and Turning Point or President Trump, that all of those people, all of us, deserve to die. It justifies the selective outrage that we're seeing. And it explains why violence is justified in some circles and is selectively, and there's selective outrage on the other side. And the rhetoric that they claim needs to, the temperature needs to be lower, that needs to calm down on both sides. That is just objectively ridiculous. It is objectively ridiculous because not 30 seconds after President Trump after someone tried to kill President Trump a third time, and you could say a fourth time with the incident in Mar-a-Lago where the kid with a shotgun was taken down. President Trump wasn't there. I think that's why it doesn't really get a lot of recognition as another attempt. But had he been there, that would have been. And this rhetoric that we're seeing, it is intended to inflame all of that. And like I said, not 30 seconds after President Trump was shot at again, we had people like J.B. Pritzker and Katie Porter and just a whole bunch of lunatics on TikTok whining about how they missed again, which is just sick, absolutely sick. But let's look at J.B. Pritzker, because actually, you know what? No, let's take a look at Katie Porter first. Katie Porter, the day after this attempt, she sent a campaign fundraising email saying F Trump. And this was in her email. Say it with me. Ready? 1, 2, 3. F Trump. That's right. F Trump. Together, we're going to kick Trump's ass in November and stop him in his tracks. This was the day after. I mean, these people are just, they're soulless ghouls. And we all know about Katie Porter and her, how she likes to assault people and berate people. This is in line with her personality for sure. She goes on to say in that email, we know what Trump is willing to do and how far he's willing to go. As I always say, every accusation from these lunatics is a confession. But she goes on to say, we know how far he's willing to go. He's willing to kill people in the streets, rip healthcare away, and ruthlessly attack our democracy. This was a fundraising email. So if the rhetoric needs to tone down, how is it right that she is going to send this fundraising email the day after somebody tries to take out the president? Now, you can say this was scheduled to go out and they just didn't bother to whatever. I don't believe that for a second, but that's an excuse you can come up with if you want. And I suppose it's plausible, but come on. This is Katie Porter we're talking about. There's absolutely no way that was not done intentionally. There was another one. Yeah, J.B. Pritzker. He pretty much said that Trump deserved this. All right, did my browser just freeze? All right, I guess it did. So we'll do this one instead. It's going to be a little smaller. No, we can do this. Yeah, there you go. Check it out.
Remember that it's been Donald Trump and the Republicans that have called for political violence. Donald Trump from the very beginning, remember when he talked about a protester at one of his rallies, that they should just beat him up, punch him. He's talked about the death penalty for General Mark Milley. He has called for jailing his political.
Who is a traitor, and that is the prescribed penalty for being a traitor. So there's that.
Opponents, me included. So this is a president who unfortunately slips into that mode so easily. But I think we should get away from all of that. I'm sure that we can find examples across both sides of the aisle of rhetoric that people didn't mean, or perhaps that they went too far about. Yeah. This is a moment when I think we should all take a step back and just remember that this country needs to bring peace to its politics, and that we need to just argue in the dialogue here about the issues and which party should be in control after November.
Because some of your critics may point to what you said in the State of the State last year when you compared the Trump administration to the rise of Nazis. What would you say to that?
Well, Manu, remember what I was talking about was the fact that a constitutional republic was torn apart in 53 days in Germany in the 1930s, and that we need to watch out for that in this country. That is what I was talking about. And we've seen it, by the way, that speech was given in February of 25. I think over the last year, much of what I said has been proven to be true, that the institutions of this democracy are being attacked by the Republicans and by Donald Trump.
Oh my goodness. These people are sick. Absolutely sick. But this is how you go from just words to this stuff being normalized to action. And the action that we're seeing play out, that we've seen play out 3 or 4 times already, is because of stuff like this. And yes, conservatives have been known to call leftists communists and Marxists and all the rest of it, but they admit to it. They belong to a party called the Democrat Socialists of America, which is a socialist communist party. So we're not saying anything out of turn. It makes them uncomfortable, but by associating with that entity, they're admitting to it. We're not saying anything that's not true. When you can demonstrably show that conservatives there is nothing Nazi-like about us by any stretch of the imagination. We're not saying that violence doesn't exist. We're not saying that violence doesn't exist on both sides. What we're saying is that there is a huge problem with one side being far more willing to employ and justify violence than the other. In that YouGov poll I cited, I don't have it here with me, but I believe, actually, you know what? Let's, yeah. In that YouGov poll, 24% of very liberal voters said that it is okay to celebrate when a political opponent dies or is killed. And 25% of those people believe that political violence is justified. But when you poll in that same poll that asked those people who are very conservative, those numbers were 3% and 4%. And I think all of them, the 24 and 25% on the left and the 3 and 4% on the right, they're all nuts, because political violence is not justified. Violence is justified in a defense of yourself and your family. And what this rhetoric has done is made it so that they can, in their lunatic minds, feel like what they're doing is protecting themselves and this country by eliminating what they have been told is a threat. Once you understand how this data is being manipulated, you understand that this is the fruit of the poisonous tree. For those of you who have a law enforcement background, you understand that concept, the fruit of the poisonous tree. If you obtain a search warrant through deception and faulty information, everything that stems from that search warrant is fruit of the poisonous tree and inadmissible. And all of these lies that we're seeing about conservatives being violent and the data that they're citing is all flawed. It's fruit of the poisonous tree. If you believe that data without diving into it, without questioning it, you have already accepted the outcome. You have already accepted that, yes, conservatives are violent, conservatives are a threat, and need to be eliminated. All right. I could go on. I had so much queued up, but we don't have a whole lot of time for that. So I want to just go ahead and let you know our sponsor for today's show is Carry Girl Gear. Head over to carrygirlgear.com and check out all of the great designs that we have there. If you have a woman in your life, wife, girlfriend, daughter, head over to carrygirl.com and check out all those great designs and get her something that she will absolutely love. Not just t-shirts, not just tank tops, accessories, drinkware, all of it. Head over to carrygirl.com today. All right. This next story that we're going to get into is something that really, at first, when I first heard it, it blew my mind. And then for a hot second anyway, and then I realized who we were dealing with. And then it was really just par for the course. The government, at least, is supposed to be neutral, but they have been in the business of picking winners and losers, and what it funds and what it prosecutes is a clue as to where they stand. And the Biden administration, they have funded a barbaric organization, and they tried to do it quietly. They tried to do it on the down low, so to speak, but it came out, and it always comes out. Joni Ernst found out that the Biden administration's SBA used a code word in its emails to hide its loans and its association with Planned Parenthood. They used the code word Benghazi to make it harder to track down. And we're going to get into that choice here in a second. But this was during the pandemic and the pandemic era loan programs, PPP and EIDL. It wasn't just the fact that Planned Parenthood should have been ineligible for any of this money, but they chose to hide the communication. They chose to conceal it. And so the question is, why? Why use a code word? Anyone who spends a half a second thinking about it understands why. Because deep down, they know that what they're funding with Planned Parenthood is barbaric and immoral. And they know that most people understand this. They try to couch it in words like reproductive health care. But here on this show, we refer to it as what it is: baby murder, infanticide. And they have been, well, they did fund this organization, And they chose to hide it because, as I said, they know that they shouldn't be, that we shouldn't be in the business of funding this barbaric practice. And during a hearing of the hearing about the FACE Act, which is the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, Brandon Gill, who is an absolute rock star in Congress, he embarrassed one of these doctors. And it was obvious that, and I'm not going to play the whole thing is almost 3 minutes. And some of this stuff is, you probably don't even really want to hear, but I want you to hear it because it is necessary to understand. And full disclosure, hearing some of this and seeing this was what changed my mind, because I wasn't always pro-life. There was a time in my life when I was pro-choice. You know, the whole her body, her choice nonsense. But when there were a couple of things, but one of them was hearing how these things are done, and then there was a video that I saw that showed it. But you need to hear this. So let's go ahead and get into this.
For abortion, for abortion policy, what's your favorite type of abortion?
I am an advocate for patients having access to the full realm of reproductive health care.
But do you have a preferred method of abortion that you like?
I do not.
Let me read through a couple different methods, and I want to get your take on how much you like these. The first type is called a suction abortion. This is when the cervix is dilated and a strong suction, 29 times the power of a household vacuum cleaner, tears the baby's body apart and sucks it through the hose into a container. Do you prefer that method?
I stand by my former testimony.
That sounds kind of gross, doesn't it? Sounds pretty gruesome. Do you agree? It does to me.
I stand by how I answered your question fully and accurately.
Okay, what about this one? This one is called dilation and curettage. After dilation of the cervix, a sharp looped knife is inserted into the uterus. The baby's body is cut into pieces and extracted, often by suction. Do you prefer that method?
What I believe we are here to talk about today is the FACE Act. We are not here to talk
I'm
about the
asking you, you're
legality
a
of
pro-abortion
abortion.
advocate. I'm asking if you prefer the dilation and curettage method.
I am an access to reproductive health care advocate.
You don't.
And we could go on with that, but I think you get the idea. She didn't want to answer the question. And there's a reason she didn't want to answer the question, because it obviously visibly made her uncomfortable. Now, I don't know if she's a doctor who performs these things or not. I'm not familiar with her. If she is, that's too bad. And if she is, I'm sure she does have a favorite method, but it's not one of those things that they like to talk about. Like in A Few Good Men, when he says those things you don't want to talk about at parties. She doesn't want to talk about this, but it needs to be talked about. And when you hear that and see that, it gives you a fresh perspective, doesn't it? At least I hope so. I think it does to normal people. But, and so, yeah, they were there during the FACE Act, but I like that Brandon Gill actually brought that up. Because the FACE Act has been used to prosecute people. And some people have done some things that deserve prosecution when it comes to these things. I get that, but the vast majority of these people who have been prosecuted under the FACE Act, all they were doing was praying. All they were doing was singing. They weren't blocking anyone from obtaining from committing the act that they were about to commit. They would try to counsel women on their way in, yeah. But they weren't stopping anyone. They weren't physically, for the most part. I know that there are some cases where that did happen, and that's unfortunate. But for the most part, they have been prosecuted for peacefully protesting, peacefully praying, peacefully singing hymns at the entrances of these baby murder facilities. And so what it shows is that enforcement is not neutral. Think about, I'm pretty sure that one of the charges against Don Lemon and those people who stormed that church was FACE Act violations. Do you think that if that had taken place during a Harris or Biden administration, that he would have been prosecuted, or that any of those people would have been prosecuted? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It shows what institutions, what they're willing to protect and what they're willing to go after. And if it aligns with the institution, in this case, the government, well, then it's going to get protection and cover. And when it doesn't, when it challenges that, when it challenges what the institution stands for, in this case, the government, it gets exposure and it gets punished. It's not rule of law, it's rule of preference. These bureaucracies exist to protect themselves and their preferred outcomes. Now, I said we were going to talk about the code word Benghazi. Planned Parenthood is a trigger for many of us on the right. And so is Benghazi. They chose that word for a reason. They chose it to basically stick it to conservatives. You remember Hillary Clinton said, "What difference at this point does it make?" Well, it makes a big difference. And so they chose this word Benghazi to try and hide their dealings with Planned Parenthood. Did they really think nobody was going to look at that? Did they really think that wasn't going to trigger someone to say, why is the SBA dealing with anything having to do with Benghazi? Well, it speaks to the fact that they were so arrogant that they didn't think any Republicans were ever going to get back into office. They figured they were just going to be able to ride this out and bury it. Had to. That had to be their thinking. Because to use the word Benghazi in conjunction with dealings with Planned Parenthood, there is absolutely no way they could have thought that a Republican would ever get into a position where they'd be able to look at it and shed light on it. There's no way. And if they did, then they just didn't care. Which I suppose is plausible when you consider that there are so many Republicans who are basically just Democrats. I get that. But I'm still leaning towards the arrogance angle, because they knew that Planned Parenthood in and of itself is politically sensitive. It's politically toxic is what it is. And so they wanted to minimize the paper trail, I guess. And then pro-life activism is inconvenient politically. And so they use that to maximize enforcement. So they avoid scandal internally and project strength externally. The result is quiet support and loud deterrence. So overall, it's not about abortion policy, even though that is a huge problem, but it's about how they wield power. And that is one of the things that I have to give the left credit for, is when they do get into power, they know how to wield it. To our great detriment, to be sure, but they wield the power that they were given. And that's a lesson I wish the Republicans and conservatives would take to heart and actually wield the power that they've been given. Because over the past year and a half, they have squandered a lot of the power that we gave them when we elected them into office. President Trump is doing what he can, but Congress, the House and the Senate, they are squandering that power. But that's, I digress. When the government can hide what it funds and selectively prosecute its opposition, there is no more neutrality. Like I said in the beginning of this, they want to portray themselves as a neutral arbiter. But when they do that, they're no longer neutral. And let's be honest, the government has never really been neutral. They want to say that they are, but come on, we know that that's nonsense. So just from a 30,000-foot view, when you look at it, which side gets protected and which side gets prosecuted? When you look at it from that perspective, and think about this, if the roles were reversed, would any of this be tolerated? We all know that it wouldn't be. It's not complicated. It's just like the woman that Brandon Gill was questioning. It's not complicated, but it's uncomfortable. And truth, if we're going to get at the truth and govern with the truth, that requires consistency, not convenience. All right. I want to, I was actually going to talk about a couple of indictments that came down. I was going to talk about James Comey's indictment, and then what's his name? David Morin's, who was Anthony Fauci's, St. Fauci the Fraudulent's former aide. They were both indicted. But I don't really want to deal with that right now. Maybe we'll talk about that on Saturday, maybe not. But I do want to get into this because this, I think, is a lot more important. the Supreme Court just blew up the left spot in spectacular fashion. And I am absolutely here for it. Absolutely here for it. They just changed the rules. And a lot of the left's political strategy became illegal, just like that, overnight. And as I said, I am here for it. They didn't just tweak redistricting. they pulled the football Marcy style right away from Charlie Brown. For years, race was the lever, and now it's a liability for the left. The Constitution showed up and just completely destroyed their narrative. And it's awesome. What they did was the Supreme Court struck down Louisiana's ridiculous congressional map. And let's take a look at the congressional map that they had, because yeah, here we go. This map is utterly ridiculous. I didn't realize it was this ridiculous. This is Louisiana's congressional map. And this blue serpentine area, that is where it is 50%, a 50% Black voting age population. And the pink is under 50%. Those districts make absolutely no sense. No sense whatsoever. Maps in a more fair fashion. And of course, the left, they're all up in arms, saying that it's white supremacy. This is about as racist a map as you can possibly get. It really is. It's almost like they want racism. They need racism. And in fact, you know what, let's, what did I do there? This is a map of the South and what it currently looks like with all these blue districts that are all drawn all wacky. And this is what it would look like if, on the right, this is what it would look like if the maps were drawn fairly. And I'm hoping this actually happens. And I'll settle for something somewhere in the middle. Because right now this is a 24 seat hold for the left, for Democrats. And this would be 12 more seats for Republicans. I mean, obviously I want all 12. I want all of these to be 20. I want the whole thing to be red, honestly. Let's just be perfectly clear. I don't think Democrats deserve any representation because they're lunatics. Yeah, I said it. And yeah, I'm not toning down my rhetoric. Not sorry. Anyway. This what the Supreme Court just did was basically tell these states that they had to comply with the Voting Rights Act. Because the way it is right now, race is the dominant factor in some of these places when they're drawing these maps. I mean, in fact, let's take a look at Illinois. Illinois is another one that is utterly ridiculous. So you're telling me somebody up here in the Northwest is going to represent somebody down here in the Southeast? That makes no sense. And then look at this serpentine district and all the rest of them. I'm actually surprised they didn't do what Virginia did and take Chicago and some of these other ones and pinwheel them out like Virginia did, honestly. And so now these states are going to have to redraw their maps, because I guarantee you, and as a result of that Supreme Court decision, suits are being drawn up and filed as we speak to have some of these maps redrawn. And that is going to be a disaster for Democrats. So even though this Louisiana is the case that spurred this, it's not about just Louisiana. It's about the entire playbook. It's about the entire country. They used to have to consider race or else they would get sued. Now, you consider race too much and you're going to lose. Maybe now the left will concentrate. I know this is wishful thinking and it's not going to happen, but maybe now is what I was going to say, is that they will consider actually trying to build a case for why we should vote for them, as opposed to just saying because you're of a certain paint job that you have to vote for us. But the problem with that is they don't have a case. They never really have. So they can't build it, and they've never tried. When was the last time Hakeem Jeffries said anything, even the least bit persuasive in terms of him trying to advance an agenda, other than Trump bad, Caroline Leavitt's a liar, yada, 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 dummy mandering, blah, blah, blah. When was the last time? Has he ever? And when you really think about it, have any leftists ever really made a case for why their policies are good? I'll wait. Well, of course they haven't. They just completely blew up one of the biggest incentive structures for the left. They used to have to draw districts based on race, and then they'd be able to survive the lawsuits and stuff like that. Now, if they use race too much, it is an automatic constitutional challenge, which they will lose. So, as I said, we will see if they actually attempt to make a case and pivot away from all the race-based nonsense and pivot away from all of the stuff that they do and actually present a case to the American people as to why their policies are better for the country. I really would love to see them try. I really would love to see them try. It can't be done. It can't be done. The best politician the left has had that I can recall was Bill Clinton. Not because he was any great conservative or anything like that, but he recognized that what he was trying to do wasn't going to work, and he compromised. Don't get me wrong; he's still a psycho, but he compromised. The next best politician the left had was Barack Obama, and we're now suffering through the consequences of his madness. So this is going to go a long way towards having equal justice in terms of electoral politics. Because if you try to have equal outcomes based on race, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. And just to bring this back into the faith for a second, the scripture does not recognize categories based on race or ethnicity or anything like that. Galatians 3:28 says there is no division in Christ. And so my contention has been, since we started this, that we have to come back to God. And if we come back to God, that will, you will be astonished as to how quickly things turn around. But of course, the left, they are anti-God and do everything they possibly can to diminish God. So the likelihood of that happening outside of divine intervention, which would solve all of it, but voluntarily having them come back, not going to happen. The left is saying that voting rights are under attack. That's not what this is. That's not what this is. This is a return to constitutional order. This should have been struck down a long time ago, if we're being honest. Should have been struck down a long time ago. And I'm really surprised it did take this long. And now we have, I mentioned before that these states are going to have to redraw their maps. Georgia has just called, or is calling for a special session to follow up. Florida, they just redrew their map. And that's going to pass. Florida is going to go from 24-8 to 28-4 in favor of Republicans. And if Virginia's map gets struck down, which I was not very optimistic about in the beginning, but based on what I've seen from the comments of the Virginia Supreme Court and now with this ruling from SCOTUS, it is. I am much more optimistic that is going to get struck down now. So despite the Republicans attempting to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, the courts could very well hand Republicans another opportunity to get things done. So we shall see. But I am, like I said, I am happy about this. I am here for it. And we'll see what happens. We shall see. All right. I wanted to, this is another story I wanted to get to. And this is something that I have talked about before, but it's back in the news, thankfully. And I talked about this when it happened. And now here we are 2 years later, and it's still, like I said, in the news. And it's good. It's a good thing that it is. Federal agents from ATF, you know, that three-letter agency that we all wish would go away. They executed a search warrant, or attempted to execute a search warrant on a man by the name of Brian Malinowski. He was the head of the Bill and Hillary Clinton National Airport here in Arkansas. And they targeted him because they believed he was selling firearms illegally. Trafficking firearms was what they said. And they tracked him. They talked to him during gun shows. They knew his movements. They had him under surveillance for quite some time before they executed this search warrant. It wasn't an arrest warrant, mind you, a search warrant, which they could have executed at any time. They could have gotten him at his place of business. They could have gotten him on his way to or from work. But they chose to do a pre-dawn raid to execute a search warrant. And as any man would do who exercises their Second Amendment rights, he heard a commotion in the early morning hours at his door and confronted the attackers and got shot in the head for it while protecting his wife. And he survived the initial attack, but he succumbed to his injuries a couple of days later. No body cam footage. This was only a couple of years ago. No body cam footage. And the actions leading up to this were so egregiously suspect that I believe that murder charges are warranted. This, because like I said, they knew his movements. They knew where he was. He was under surveillance. And they chose to execute a search warrant while he was sleeping. And this is not the first time that something like this has happened with the ATF. There was a kid in Maryland who, there was a picture of him holding what they thought was an illegal firearm. And I believe this was actually the Maryland State Police. I could be wrong at which agency conducted this raid. But this kid was 21 years old, had a picture on Instagram of him with a gun that they thought looked illegal. And so rather than confronting him, rather than issuing a warrant and having him come down to the station or whatever, they prepared a pre-dawn raid on him. And his family says that they shot through the house into his room, hitting him, and I believe they hit his girlfriend as well. Killed him. And then come to find out that the gun that they had, that he was pictured with, was not illegal. But this story about Brian Malinowski is back in the news because his wife, who just now is speaking out. She hasn't spoken at all since this happened a couple of years ago. But it is now back in the news because the family is suing the ATF and trying to get some clarity and hopefully some compensation. Not that there really is any amount of compensation that can be that would make any of it worth it. But yeah, it's not. This was such a sad story and so unnecessary. And it's actually not the family suing, it's Arkansas lawmakers that are bringing this back up. And they sent a letter to the ATF because they want to find out exactly what happened. Now, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to, honestly. I'm really not. This was the bribing DOJ. This was the bribing ATF. It would not surprise me in the least if any of the records pertaining to this just somehow magically disappeared. And then again, maybe they're just as arrogant as the SBA and didn't bother to purge any of that because they said, yeah, it's never going to happen. So I hope that's what they did. But yeah, here's hoping that the Malinowskis get justice from this. Because as I said, this was a search warrant. It wasn't an arrest warrant. It was a search warrant they could have executed at any time. And even if they wanted to break down his door, even if that was going to get them off, they could have done it while he was at work. They could have grabbed him while he was at work, served the warrant, kicked in his door. He'd still be alive. The ATF would probably still have egg on their face because from all accounts, he hadn't done anything wrong. He didn't have mass quantities of firearms in his home. He wasn't selling a mass quantity of firearms at these gun shows. So, but again, they hate guns. They hate anyone who owns guns and sells guns. So I think that was the impetus behind it, but we'll see. We're definitely going to be keeping an eye on that. I want to get you out of here on a somewhat lighter note because, oh, wow. I remember a long time ago, I was working security. I must have been 18 years old. And a guy I worked with, maybe even 17, but a guy I worked with had an interview with a police department. And he came back to us and he told us that he bombed the interview. And we were like, why? Because, I mean, this guy was pretty squared away. I wouldn't say he was like completely squared away, but he was, I thought he had a really good shot. He did really well on the test. I thought he was maybe not a shoo-in, but pretty close. And he came back and he said, he answered a question, and I forget the exact question, but he answered the question basically, well, I saw on TV. And we all looked at him like he lost his mind. And he was like, yeah, I know. I don't know why I said it. I think he went on to become a cop in another jurisdiction somewhere. But this right here is what brought me to that, because this was absolutely hilarious. At least I think. Well, I'm not sure where it went. Like I said, I had a lot to get to, and I have a ton of tabs open. But I'm just going to grab it here from my link on my notes here. Just give me a second. Bear with me. I got a couple of others that I'm going to get to. Maybe. Oh yeah, there we go. I got it. It's the end of the show. It's not Friday yet, but let's just call it a Friday show and leave it at that, shall we? Oh boy, I got a couple others I want to get to too, but this, I promise we're going to bring it back. Here we go. This guy, he is a senator from the state of Virginia, actually. His name is Lamont Bigby. And this was absolutely, I couldn't believe he actually said this, but check this out.
And listen, I almost took issue with the other side saying that we don't understand. But I grew up watching the Waltons. I grew up with Opie. I even watched the Dukes of Hazzard.
Oh, well.
I think I know a little bit about rural America.
You hear the crowd laughing at him because they realize this is absolutely ridiculous.
And when I think about why we're here, we're not just here. I'm not just here for Theo. I'm not just here for Arnold or Willis.
He's continuing with the whole TV show thing. I mean, just wow. What do you say to that? What do you say to that? Unbelievable. All right. One other thing I want to get to here. Stephen A. Smith. We're gonna bring this back to the beginning of the show. Stephen A. Smith, he put out a poll asking whose rhetoric has contributed most to the climate of political violence in America. And I don't know if you can see it here. No, I guess you can't. I know it's going to be hard to see, but the choices are President Trump, the media, Democrats, Republicans. Democrats are at 44.7%. The media, which is the propaganda arm of the Democrats, is at 33.5%. So over 78% people believe that the media and Democrats are responsible for the climate of political violence in America. And I think that that is completely accurate. Republicans, 1.2%. And I mean, obviously, this is not a scientific poll, but it's got 55,589 votes. Stephen A. Smith's audience is largely leftist. So that tells me that the average voter, whether they are a Democrat or Republican, believes that the violence is coming from the left. I thought that was interesting. All right, there was one other clip I wanted to get to, Lee Zeldin and Rosa DeLauro. Maybe I'll save that for Saturday's show, which is going to be on this Saturday at 8 p.m. Central, so be sure to check it out. And I am Big E, and you are watching or listening to the Mission Radio Man Briefing on the SHR Media Network, where you can catch my good friend Sackhead Sean on the Edge of Liberty every Monday and Wednesday at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific. Jersey Joe, the Reaver of Common Sense himself, every Monday and Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. He's been on a bit of a break lately, but he will be back. And then we have BZ in the Berserk Bobcat Saloon every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 Pacific. So he will be on tonight. Be sure to check him out. And the new guy, Lyle Armstrong with Beer and Bullstein, every Friday and Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Please like and subscribe. Share the channel. Share all these great shows. Pray that we continue to have a breakthrough that we've been experiencing. It's kind of on a slowdown, yeah, but we're still growing, and so we're very thankful for all of it. All right. As we close out here, we can all say that it's wrong. But truth isn't just what you say. It's what you're willing to confront. And as Christians, we have to stand boldly for the truth. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, God gave us a spirit of fear, not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. So if we keep avoiding the truth, we're falling into that spirit of fear. We can't avoid the truth, because if we keep avoiding it, we're going to keep dealing with this over and over again. And that's something we say we don't want. So let's stand on the truth and deal with it. All right, y'all, that is it for this briefing. We are not just here to fill the air, but we are here to equip Christians, Christian men, and spread the gospel of Jesus Christ and carry the banner of faith, freedom, and hope into future generations. And if anything that we said here today matters to you, please don't just watch, but share it. Share it with another man, bring him into the fight. And if you want to wear what you stand for, head over to missionreadymen.com, click Shop 7 Armors, and check out all the great designs that we have over there. And you can also, while you're on 7 Armors, instead of clicking on 7 Armors, click on SHR Shop and check out all of the great designs that we have for the guys' shows. And remember, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away, but the Lord is right there with you. So keep your prayers going up and your head on a swivel. God bless.